Welcome to the third installment of my Troops Guide series. This time, we're covering the Epic tier. Just like in my previous guides, I'll be going over which troop are worth investing in, which ones aren't, and where each troop shines. Before jumping into each individual troop, I want to talk about something that's especially important for new players: playable levels and stats. Unlike rares, epic troops are harder to obtain. Most newer players will have their epics sitting around level 3 or 4, with maybe 1 or 2 reaching level 6. Because of that, it's important to understand epic troops are not worth using at lower levels, especially when most of them cost 6 deployment points. If a troop is a multi-troop unit, and if you're not sure what I mean by that, check out my Rare Troops Guide where I explain the difference between multi-units and single units more in detail. Once again, if it's a multi-troop unit, then their playable level is generally level 5. That's because at level 5, their stats become comparable to a level 6 rare troop. You can see that with examples like the Flame Mage and Forest Scout, at level 5, they're finally strong enough to justify bringing into battle. There are a few exceptions. Some troops can still be useful at level 4 because of their abilities. For example, like the Poison Master and his Toxic Fueled ability, or the Oracle with its attack damage buffing ability. Even then, usually you want them to be level 5 and level 6. For single units, whether they're playable depends both on their stats and whether they're a melee or range unit. A ranged troop should generally have 10,000 HP or more before it's considered strong enough for regular use. The reason is simple: you want them to survive common abilities such as Ninja Assassin's Blade Tempest, Bomber's Self-Destruct, and other burst damage abilities. If they can't survive those threats, they often won't stay alive long enough to give value. For melee troops, I like to see around 20,000 HP or more. Melee units are expected to stand on the front line and absorb damage. If they can't survive long enough to tank hits, your ranged units won't have enough time to make a difference. Example. Let's take a look at a couple examples such as the Pumpkin Guard to see how the stats threshold affects their effectiveness and whether they're worth using at current levels. A level 4 Pumpkin Guard and a ranged unit versus 2 units of Goblins. And the level 5 and the level 6. With all that out of the way, let's move on to the individual troops. We'll start with 2 troops that most players don't need to worry about unless they're spending money on the game: Warrior Archer and Dwarf Berserker. These 2 can only be obtained through the wheel or card master. After unlocking, you can obtain additional copies through fusing rare troops. But fusing rare troops costs gems. Since gems are usually much better spent elsewhere, especially for newer players, I'm not going to spend too much time covering these 2. Just know that they're difficult to obtain and expensive to gain copies of, making them an unrealistic options for most free-to-play players. Now let's move on to one of the best epic troops in the game, the Oracle. You'll be using the Oracle in probably 99% of your army setups. The Oracle's buff stacks up to 20 times, providing a massive damage increase to nearby allies. At level 6, each individual Oracle provides a 4% buff, which means a maximum of 32% increased attack power. However, the ability range at level 6 is a little short, so units standing near the Oracle usually receives closer to a 30% buff. Once you reach level 7, the ability range increases enough to consistently apply the full effect. Because of that, getting your Oracle to level 7 should be one of your highest priorities. Here is a comparison of the ability range between the level 6 and the level 7 Oracle. Next up is the Poison Master. For new players, this is a troop you'll want in your army for PvP. Most armies you'll face early on are made up of multi-units, which allows Poison Master's splash damage to deal tremendous damage. Not only that, the Poison Master will also be one of your primary damage dealers in Infinity Wars. A large number of Infinity War enemies are weak to water, and Poison Master happens to deal exactly that. As your account progresses, and you unlock strong AoE options, Poison Master's usage will eventually fall off. Next up is the Bone Warlock. This is a very strong troop because of the synergy he has with the Bone Gunner. His slow effect ability allows the Bone Gunner's execution barrage ability to go off, making the two of them a dangerous combination. Bone Warlock can also help activate the Marksman's second ability, Flaw Exploit, giving him even more utility. The Warlock's ability has a very long range, so you usually want to keep him positioned safely in the back line. Never underestimate the value of slow effect in this game. They can completely swing a battle in your favor. Since his ability is energy based, meaning every attack he deals he gains energy to charge up for his ability, experienced players can pair him up with Rip Wizard to help him cast more frequently. New players with 200 deployment points or less, this is not worth it because Rip Wizard costs 8 deployment points to play. Keep in mind, the Rip Wizard's energy granting ability has a fairly short range, so you'll need to keep them relatively close to each other for it to work effectively. Outside of Arena, Bone Warlock is also useful in Twin Dragon Hunt because he deals wind damage. Once you have enough Bone Gunners leveled up, you can also use a few Bone Warlock in certain Affinity Wars to further increase your Gunner damage output. Since we're already talking about slow effects, let's move on to the Snowman Warrior. One thing you'll notice is that Bone Warlock has a fairly low drop rate because he's such a valuable troop. Snowman Warrior, on the other hand, has a more average drop rate. Because of that, many players will end up using Snowman Warrior as their primary source of slow until they get a playable level Bone Warlock. Personally, I consider the Snowman Warrior a weaker version of the Bone Warlock, but both troops have their own strengths. Since Snowman Warrior is a multi-unit troop, each individual snowman can trigger its own ability. His ability also targets anything within his normal attack range, while Bone Warlock's ability tends to prioritize range units. This means Snowman is better at slowing enemy front lines and helping your tanks win engagements. Bone Warlock, meanwhile, excels at disrupting range and backline units, especially when paired with Bone Gunner. With all that in mind, I generally agree with the game's recommendation of placing Snowman Warrior in the middle. Next is the Rock Thrower. To be honest, I think this troop is below average. For a troop that costs 60 deployment points and fights in melee range, his health is fairly low and his damage output is even lower. If I need frontline units, I'd rather bring 2 units of Paladins. If I need crowd control stun, I'd rather use Ursa Champion, which is a ranged troop. His stun ability also isn't particularly impressive, lasting only 0.3 seconds. That said, Rock Thrower does have a niche use. He can be effective as a sacrificial unit during flanks or backstab plays for new players. You could send him in to apply stun and distract part of the enemy army. One of my favorite uses for him is in Arena against incoming Frost Queens. As you can see in this example, the Frost Queen comes in from a flank or backstab play, and is repeatedly stunned before she can activate her ability. Since the Frost Queen's ability deals significant splash damage, preventing it from activating can completely shut down her value and make your opponent's deployment of her a waste. Now, in order for this to work, the Frost Queen needs to land directly on top of the Rock Thrower unit. Disclaimer, this only works 99% of the time because of course there's that one time that she'll get it off. Here is an actual gameplay. As you can see, 2 level 6 Frost Queens. If their ability goes off, it will be devastating. You can see here, my 2 Rock Throwers ready to catch. And this is the result. Next up is the Flame Mage. This troop is essentially the replacement of the Apprentice Mage. By even a level 7, I found that he still underperforms compared to a level 9 Forest Scout. Because of that, his overall usage is fairly limited. For new players, I generally wouldn't recommend using him in Arena. You'll usually get better results sticking with your level 9 Forest Scouts. The one exception is when you're facing armies that rely heavily on Bone Warlocks or Ninja Assassins. In those situations, replacing one Forest Scout with a Flame Mage can sometimes make your army more resistant to their abilities. Where the Flame Mage really shine is in Evil Ivy Hunt. He provides solid fire damage and can perform well until you eventually replace him with higher levels like Ninetales or stronger fire mythics. Outside of that, there aren't really many situations where I would prioritize using it. Pumpkin Guard. If you haven't checked out my Rare Troops guide yet, I highly recommend doing so. As a new player, you'll likely use Pumpkin Guard until you eventually get level 8 Goblin Chefs, which are usually the better option for fewer deployment points. That said, Pumpkin Guard still has some unique value because of his taunt ability. In modes like Infinity War, his taunt can help keep pressure off your other tanks and important damage dealers. Another advantage is his surprisingly high damage output. For example, in Evil Ivy Hunt, Pumpkin Guard can deal significantly more damage than most tanks who has similar health stats, making him a solid option when you're trying to maximize overall damage. Last but not least, we have the Woodland Wizard. Like Royal Archer and Dwarf Berserker, Woodland Wizard can only be unlocked through the Wheel or Card Master. Since I don't recommend spending gems on any fusions, those are realistically the main ways you'll obtain him. I'm also fairly sure his fusion drop rate is extremely low. His healing ability activates faster than Woodland Guardian, making him the more reliable healer. The amount he heals is based on his level. For example, at level 6, he heals 634 per second. His level 6 ability extends his heal time to 5 seconds. In Arena, he's excellent at keeping your ranged units alive. He's also extremely useful in Evil Ivy Hunt, where sustained healing can make a huge difference. In Infinity War, his usefulness is more limited. The main exception is during Shattering Slash, where he can help keep your ranged units alive through the incoming splash damage. And that wraps up my epic troop guide. I hope this will help you decide which epic troops are worth using and for what situations. If you found this guide useful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss my future content. Until next time.